depending on where you're dialing in from in the world. We'd love to hear from you. So let us know that you're here. Say hello in the chat box, introduce yourselves and where you're from. My name's Danny. I'm the director of the Whitley Fund for Nature, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the Applying for Conservation Funding webinar. So this webinar forms part of a suite of free sessions that we're providing to our Whitley Award Network this week. But today, we're really grateful to be joined by a number of speakers from different conservation funders, and they include the Rufford Foundation, the People's Trust for Endangered Species, the Mohammed bin Zayed Conservation Funding Programme, the Conservation Leadership Programme, and ZSL's Edge of Existence Programme. And as such, this webinar is open to all of our collective network and alumni, so welcome everybody. And if you haven't already, do stick your name in the chat box and tell us who you are and what you're working on. We'd love to hear from you, given the wealth of experience and the diversity of conservationists we have on this session today. Now, the aim of this webinar is to encourage applications to each of our organisations, but also between our organisations. And we were talking just last night when we were preparing for this session about just how many conservation projects we have jointly funded over the years at different stages of people's careers. And we would love to see more of that. So each of our speakers will present for about 10 minutes and they'll talk to you about their application process and what they look for in a successful proposal and grantee. So we're going to start with Simon from the Rufford Foundation. Then we will move on to Nida from PTES. We'll then move on to Nicholas from MBZ, then to Stuart from CLP, then to Olivia from Edge, and then finishing up with myself from WFN. So we clearly love an acronym between us. And then finally, I'd really like to just ask everybody pop their questions in the chat box as we go along, and we'll come back together at the end and we'll try and address them as a group then. So Simon, without further ado, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Simon Mickleborough. I'm the grants manager at the Rufford Foundation based in London, UK. Basically, the Rufford Foundation is a private sector family foundation with a remit to support nature conservation projects in the developing world. And we started in 1982, and since then the foundation has given out grants totaling in excess of £100 million. So it supports individuals particularly through the Rufford Small Grants Programme, which is what I'll be talking about today. And these are mainly early career conservationists. So currently through this Rufford Small Grants Programme, we give about £2 million a year in grants. So the programme itself started in 1999. Since that time, it's given over 5,800 grants to projects in over 160 countries. And in total, we've given in excess of £25 million in grants. The Rufford Small Grants Programme is a 5-stage process. So you need to move from one grant, you have to complete one grant before you can then apply for a further grant. But there are 5 possible grants that anybody can apply for. So to begin with, the first grant would be a first Rufford Small Grant, which is up to £6,000. If you're successful with that, you can apply for a second Rufford Small Grant, again up to £6,000. Again, if you're successful with that particular project, you can apply for a first booster grant of up to £10,000, then a second booster grant for up to another £10,000, and then finally a completion grant of up to £15,000. So as I said, 5-stage process, and you need to complete and fill in the relevant final reports before you can move on to the next stage. So the general criteria for the Rufford Small Grants Programme is work in the developing world. And our interpretation of developing world is fairly broad. You'll see more information on our website. But generally speaking, it covers most of the countries you might expect, plus a few, such as some of countries in Eastern Europe, for example. But we don't fund work in the EU or areas like Australia, the US, UK. But as I said, you'll find full details on our website anyway. If you're applying for a Rufford Small Grant, as I said, the grants themselves are certainly relatively small to start with, and we would expect that any Rufford Small Grant would be a significant part of the budget. So if you have a big budget of, say, £40,000 and you're looking for £5,000 from Rufford, it's probably less likely that you'll get support. Whereas if your proposal is for perhaps 50% or 100% of funding from Rufford, then you stand a much better chance. We're normally looking at projects of 12 to 18 months duration, and they have to be on threatened species. And that's basically species listed by the IUCN Red List as threatened at the global scale. Having said that, we understand that many species have yet to be assessed by IUCN. So if there are species that are considered to be threatened but yet to be assessed, we will consider that as well. Our main focus really is on PhD or MSc students, people at that kind of level or equivalent, or people who've graduated from such studies in the past 3 years. Having said that, we will consider other people who fit our main criteria, which are on our website, but perhaps don't have or are not studying for an MSc or a PhD. And if you look at general exclusions from things we won't support, I've said already that the funding is concentrated on the developing world. So as I've said, we won't consider applications for work in places such as the UK or the US. Having said that, you could be based in some of these countries, for example, at a university in these countries, but still doing work in a developing country. We won't fund pure research. We need to have some evidence that the work that we're supporting actually has a conservation benefit. We also won't fund expeditions. So this is where maybe you have to raise funds in order to take part in certain expeditions. And finally, we can't cover the costs of attending conferences or seminars. And in fact, we can't cover the costs of fees related to MSc or PhD studies, for example. We can only cover the fieldwork costs. So if you look at some of the pointers to success, the sort of things that we look at when we're looking at an application, there are a number of things that we consider. So we're looking at projects that really do have a very clear conservation outcome. You need to develop a good question to ask and a good way in which you're going to answer that question. And there are a number of websites you can visit for more information. Conservation Leadership Programme, and you'll hear later from them, is a good website. Conservation Evidence is another good one. There are a number of sites that you can check. PRISM, which looks at the monitoring of small projects. These are all things you can look at if you're considering developing a project. Another important element is who will actually act on the results. So you need to make sure that you've involved all the relevant stakeholders from an early stage, and make sure that you know who is the person or persons that you need to approach who are actually going to take action based on the results of your project, because far too many projects, sadly, produce a report which never then gets acted upon. We need to check that you've got all the relevant experience within the team. We wouldn't expect, particularly people at the sort of level who are applying for rougher grants, we wouldn't expect them necessarily to have all the experience in all the different aspects of the work they may want to do. So you want to make sure that you have assembled a team that has all the relevant experience to undertake the work that you're doing. We'd also look at whether it's overly ambitious, the work that you're trying to achieve. And in a period of 12 to 18 months, there's a limited amount to what you can achieve. And I always say that it's probably better to do one thing very well rather than to try and do several things poorly. So think very carefully about what you can sensibly achieve in the time available to you. And are you actually measuring the impact of the work that you're doing? And a lot of funders will look at this and want some evidence that the work you're doing is having some kind of impact. And I mentioned the PRISM website, and that's a very good resource you can look at because it gives you lots of information on how you can measure impact for small scale projects. If you're making an application to the Rougher Foundation, I suggest a number of things that you should consider. First of all, do read the guidelines and read them carefully. We do sadly get a lot of applications from people who haven't actually read the guidelines and not actually eligible to apply. So make sure if there are frequently asked questions on the websites, check those, download them if necessary, look at the questions that are going to be asked and make sure that you do actually qualify for support. Ask for help from people. So maybe if you're doing MSc or a PhD, perhaps your supervisor will be able to help, or perhaps colleagues might be able to help. And do take your time over making an application. It's good to spend as much time as possible thinking about your application and preparing it before you actually do the online version. Do complete the application form in full and make sure that you do answer all the questions, because for some funders, if you don't answer the questions, then they simply may not consider your application. Do avoid jargon and acronyms if you can. Don't assume that the people who are going to be reviewing the project will know everything about the field that you're working in. So try and keep your language as simple as possible and avoid jargons and acronyms if you can. With the references, for example, with Rufford, it's very important, obviously, and for many other funders to have references that will support your application. So make sure that you've contacted these people well in advance so that they can provide a necessary a necessary reference in time. And one thing I do always say is do avoid trying to draft references for referees to sign. It's something that from the Ruffer Foundation we take a very dim view of. So I think it's important that you can provide information to referees for them to provide their reference. But this is an independent reference from somebody who knows you. So if it's a suggestion that somehow you've drafted it for them, this will not reflect well in terms of your application. Do spend time on your budget, because this is a very, very important part of the project, and make sure that what you provide, the information you provide in the budget, does link back to the project proposal, does link back to the objectives and activities that you are undertaking. You'll almost certainly be required to provide some kind of personal profile, some kind of information about you. So choose this as very much an opportunity to promote yourself, to say more about what you do, what your capabilities are, what your experience is. This is an opportunity for you to shine amongst other people, because the thing is that you will be competing against people. In many cases, funders perhaps only manage to fund 10% of the applications that they receive. So it's competitive. So the personal profile is something that it gives you the opportunity to be able to promote yourself and for you to stand out amongst the crowd. So that's basically a very brief introduction to the Ruffer Foundation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Simon. So we're going to hand it over to Nida now. Over to you.
Just getting my talk loaded. So hopefully you can see my slides now. I'm Nida Alfulage. I'm the Conservation Research Manager at People's Trust for Endangered Species. We were established in the late 70s. We're a conservation wildlife trust. Initially, we were set up, we had welfare roots, but we now have a conservation remit. But all of the work that we want to support must be underpinned by sound science. So PTS helps vulnerable species and habitats through various practical conservation work. And I'm talking to you today about our international remit, but we do also have a significant UK focus. So we have a board of trustees. We have 4 trustees at the moment, who are the ones who, along with a couple of staff members, myself included, help assess any grant applications that we receive. And we have a team of just under 20 staff, 5,000 supporters who are donors, but we also have a large following on social media as well, lots of other people who volunteer and are engaged with us. So most of our funding, unlike Rufford, actually comes from individual donations. We have supporters who set up regular direct debits with us, and we also send out appeal letters, and these focus on many of the projects that we're supporting around the world, and our supporters respond with funds. And then many of our supporters also leave us legacies. And then we get a small amount of our funding from grant giving trusts ourselves, and we also receive some government grants as well. So we like to be strategic in where we direct our fundraising. We want to prioritise key species where we can make a difference. And we're also really keen to support projects that identify specific problems, they find solutions, and then we're able to disseminate best practice outcomes from that type of work. We also are really keen to support work that involves and engages local communities, because without engaging local communities, there's often not going to be any long-term solution. Much of the work we support involves human-wildlife conflict. And we're also really focused on ensuring that the work that we fund involves sound evidence gathering where possible, so that those results can then be shared more widely, and more practitioners can benefit from the work. So we have a history of grant giving. That is why PTES was initially set up. We actually tend to be fairly responsive. We have 4 grant giving rounds each year where we receive applications quarterly and we assess them, but we don't tend to direct to a specific geographical area or on a specific taxa. We're fairly responsive and fairly open. We do, however, only support international developing countries. We like to focus on species rather than habitat, and partly this is because it helps us fundraise with our supporters as well. It tends to generate more fundraising for us, which means we've got more funds to give out. And we're a small organisation, but we feel that we've got a good role to play globally. Our office is just based in London. We've only got staff in the UK, so we heavily rely on IUCN specialists to help assess applications that we don't know much about. So when you're applying to BTS for funds, we tend to fund small discrete projects, but we are also open to funding work that is part of a larger remit, where we realise that that happens quite often. We only support work in developing countries and countries that are classified as middle or low income by the World Bank. And although we do support UK or other Western-based researchers or conservationists working not in their home country, we do prefer to support project leaders who are based in their own country. Then they tend to have a better understanding of their local communities and the issues. So we welcome applications from both scientific researchers and from practical conservationists. Most of the work we do tend to fund is focused on one species, but we are happy to accept applications that focus on a group or a suite of species, especially where it makes sense. You might be working on a group of amphibians, for example, or a plant community. And we accept applications from NGOs and research departments. We don't accept applications from individuals who aren't based within an institute or organisation, because then we don't know what the longevity of the work's going to be. And we give priority to species that are classified on the IUCN Red List as either endangered, critically endangered, or threatened in the wild. We've got there are types of work that we don't fund. We don't fund student fees, living costs. We don't fund undergraduate or master's students, but we will give funds towards PhD students, but just not towards that, similarly to Rufford, only to the field work. We don't support the core salary or admin costs of an organisation where they're not related to a project. And we won't support work on an alien species in a country unless it's really likely to benefit a native species that's categorised as threatened, endangered, or critically endangered. And applications from developed countries outside the UK are also highly unlikely to be funded. So to date, over more than 40 years, we've awarded over 300 grants to projects all around the world, focusing on several hundred different species. We've awarded over £7.5 million to projects. And many of the people that we've supported and the work we've supported, it has, although the projects are relatively short term, we've given continuation grants. So some people we've been supporting for over 10 years, helping them establish their own NGOs. We do predominantly focus on mammals, reptiles and amphibians. Our trustees feel that there are many organisations focusing on birds, so we don't tend to focus on birds, but we do support other work on flora and fish. We're very keen to do that. And we're keen to support as big a variety of species as possible to help our fundraising. I mentioned the IUCN Red List categories that we support. And these are just a few of the species, very few of the number of the species that we've supported over the years, and ditto a few of the countries that we've supported project leaders working in. So our Conservation Insight grants are worth between £10,000 and £20,000 for up to 2 years. You can apply for up to £10,000 for 1 year and up to £20,000 for 2 years. This information will circulate you the web link, but the information and the application form are on our website. So we're really looking to support critical scientific work that will find critical scientific evidence that will help conserve a species, answer key conservation questions to help conservationists further afield undertake critical conservation action, and also implement key local actions that will make a significant positive impact for endangered species. So our key themes, as I'm just wrapping up here, are gathering evidence for mitigation work, using scientific evidence to get changes made to local, national or international policy, and devising and testing new methods that might help monitor species or groups of species. Thank you very much for listening, and you can also see some of the types of work types of projects we've been supporting on our success stories pages on our website.
Good afternoon.
Okay.
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me well. My name is Nicholas Hurd. I'm from the Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund. We are a small donor organisation. We've been operating for about 12 years, primarily focusing on species conservation work in the field, in situ, very much enabling people to get their hands dirty and to support their passion to stop extinction for endangered species. We provide grants of up to $25,000 for each time, but in fact, the average grant size is closer to $9,000 per project. In a given year, we give $1.5 million. This is usually spread over 160 to 180 grants per year. We provide grants for work anywhere in the world, to anyone, so they don't necessarily need to be affiliated with an organization, although it is preferable. We do provide grants for any species, so any fauna, plants, and fungi. Again, though, we do prioritize based on the IUCN Red List, so species which are more endangered, more threatened, but also ones which are less known, of which there is not so much known, but are probably highly threatened. We also try to support local conservationists, be they individuals or organizations, and to try and support those people where we can help develop some capacity for conservation. We have an online application process, which is why I've left our website, our URL there, where you can find a lot of details relating to the types of projects we do or do not support. As I say, our priority is to support passionate species conservation in the field. I will then move on slowly just to outline some of the competitive nature of an application to the MBZ fund, and no doubt to other organizations as well. Just by demonstration, in 2019, we had over 1,600 applications, and we were only able to award 170 grants. So that's around 10%. However, we have awarded in the last 12 years over 2,000 grants, which have covered more than 140 different species. That's for around $21.5 million.
Sorry, quick interruption, Nicholas. I'm not sure if you wanted to share your screen, but if you do, then just feel free to pop that on as well. Otherwise, just feel free to speak about the MBZ.
Right. Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So it's a very competitive process from the MBZ fund or any other organization, which brings me to how can one potentially be more successful when submitting a grant to the MBZ fund in particular, but also maybe to other organizations. First of all, I would say that for us, species is paramount. It's in the name, or rather like with PTS. And also, I think any project supported must be relevant to the scale and the scope to what is required for that species. So is it a local project or more regional? Some species are rather more difficult to help protect with a small grant of even $25,000. Maybe some species which are far more wide-ranging and for whom that kind of money will not make much difference, are not able to achieve such concrete results, and for whom the conservation work is maybe more expensive. I think it's important to propose a project which is on the correct sort of scale and scope and appropriate to the grant which is being sought after. So really it's down to the reviewers ultimately. And I think for anyone who is proposing a project, one needs to bear in mind what the reviewers want. I think every reviewer who is involved in such a process really wants to support species conservation. But if there are so many applications and it's so difficult, then how can they choose? Some of these guidelines have already been mentioned previously. So criteria and the frequently asked questions have been read. There's no point in submitting an application which is ineligible. I think it's also important that any applicant makes sure that the text of the application is clear and concise. The reviewers have an awful lot of material to read, and for them, if they can understand what an application is and how it is impactful on the species very quickly, then that will earn plus points. Honesty is also important. We ask people what the red list status of their primary species is, and it's important that that is correct. I think it's also important to be clear about how this project proposed will make a difference to the species in question, and also how it relates to other initiatives which are also maybe being implemented on behalf of this project or on behalf of the species or have been previously. The reviewers also like to have a closer look at the budget. As Nida mentioned, it's great if a project is small and discrete and if the grant being awarded can completely cover that project. But we also appreciate that sometimes it can be part of a larger program or initiative where maybe this grant is the crucial final donation that actually makes sure the project is implemented, or maybe it's the first grant which can maybe stimulate more funding later on. I think it's important to build trust during the course of the proposal. I mentioned honesty earlier on. I think if a reviewer can read a proposal and can understand what the applicant wants to do, that will help hugely. Also, it's good to tell a good story to make sure that the proposal flows naturally within the guidelines of the application form. And as part of that, I think if an applicant feels that they could justify the proposal and the project to colleagues, that would probably help a lot. If that is possible, then it comes through on the application form when a reviewer reads it. It's also worth bearing in mind that essentially the reviewers do have significant experience of species conservation and, in our case, of the species in question. Maybe not directly of that particular geographic area and that species in particular, but of the species, the taxonomic group. So, for example, all the amphibian proposals that come to the MBZ fund are reviewed primarily by an amphibian conservationist. So I think reporting, if there are previous grants awarded, we like to follow up to provide additional grants if possible, but reporting from a previous project is very important, particularly when the competition is so tough. I think it's important to show clearly and concisely how the previous grant helped the species and the previous project. And funders always like a bit of recognition. So certainly in academic papers or media articles, in photos are always useful. It is worthwhile making sure that the donors feel good and feel appreciated. It does also, as Nida pointed out, help them raise more money from elsewhere in order to support more species conservation. I think it's leveraging is also something which is very important. How will this project make a difference to the species? How will this money be combined potentially with money from elsewhere to really enable the project to go ahead or to be able to leverage additional funding from elsewhere? Is there scope for an additional grant from somewhere else which would really expand the project? Or would the funding provided by this grant potentially be swallowed up by grants and funding from elsewhere? Would it help attract donors? If it were a larger project, would it attract additional donors from elsewhere? And if it is added funding, which is added to an existing project and complementing other money, then how does it really join with that other money? Is it simply supporting overheads, or is it supporting actual conservation work? I think ultimately, though, what most reviewers are looking for, as I said, reviewers want to provide grant money. Primarily, they're looking for a proposal which they can understand, which clearly will make a difference to the species, and where the passion of the individual or the organization which is applying for the grant is clearly reflected. The reviewers and the donor organizations want to provide money to the best projects that will make the best difference to the species, and that, I think, is the most important element. Thank you very much.
Sorry, just realised I'm on mute. Thanks. So I'm Stuart Patterson. I'm the Executive Manager of the Conservation Leadership Programme. We're a partnership of 3 global conservation organisations: BirdLife International, Fauna and Flora International, and the Wildlife Conservation Society. And all of our work and all of our small grants are funded by Arcadia, which is a charitable fund of Lisbeth Rousing and Peter Baldwin. We've got a small dedicated team of 6 people, 4 of whom are based in the UK and 2 of which are based in the US. First and foremost, we're a capacity building programme. So we're focused on building the leadership capacity of the next generation of conservation leaders. The programme started in 1985, and throughout that sort of history, you've got a long history of focusing on young professionals who have the potential to be leaders. And through the work of CLP, we support the professional development of people who've been identified primarily through our small grant programme. And once identified, we look to continue building up the professional skills long term. So once you're an awardee of the CLP, you remain part of the alumni network and you can continue to receive support from us. I'll talk mainly about our team awards. We funded over 800 projects and internships in 100 countries. And as well as the funding, the team award funding, award winners are also able to get support through leadership training, project planning, behaviour change, fundraising, and gender and conservation also modules which we deliver. And many of our alumni are still connected with the programme, many of our grantees, and they're providing mentors to, they're acting as mentors to other people within the programme. But our alumni are also giving back to the programme, and it's something which we really appreciate and helps us to develop as a programme. If you're a new applicant to CLP, you'll be applying for a Future Conservationist Award, and this is a single deadline every year. Our deadline's coming up now on the 10th of October. As I mentioned before, the award winners are also accessible. They can receive training from CLP, and all members are eligible for ongoing support. But the first grant is for $15,000, and then you can apply for follow-up funding, which is $25,000. And a leadership award of $50,000. So it's similar to Rufford's tiered system of funding. But overall, bigger picture, it's opportunity to be awarded $90,000 over a 6 to 9 year period. So it's really worth something considering. The Future Conservationist Awards are $15,000. They're predominantly aimed at projects in low and middle income countries, with some exceptions of high income island nations in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. The team, we focus a lot, we spend a lot of attention looking at the team eligibility. So it's team projects of 3 people or more. They should all have less than 5 years professional experience working in the conservation sector. The project should be led by a national or co-led by a national of the countries, and at least 50% of the team members should be nationals of the countries where the project's being supported. But we don't support work that's being funded by or work supported or projects led by the CLP partner organisations, which are BirdLife, WCS and FFI. And team members can only work on one CLP funded project at a time. So the Future Conservationist Awards are for projects which are 3 months to 12 months. And they've really got to focus on delivering conservation impact. So research can be a part of the work, but it shouldn't just be a research focused project. Like the other donors here, we focus on species, but we also consider data deficient species as being eligible for support. And any justification should be made within the project if they're not listed as either data deficient, vulnerable, endangered or critically endangered. The Future Conservationist Award should be a new project, so not something which is part of an ongoing programme of work. And similar to Nicholas mentioned, we want to be supporting people who are doing field work. So this could be a real strong element and a significant amount of time spent in the field. So no gene storage or captive breeding. I've mentioned previously, it shouldn't be a CLP partner project. Careful considerations to the budget need attention, so we don't support salaries or stipends for team members within the Future Conservationist Awards, and any item above $1,000 need to be justified. And all the budget should be itemised and carefully itemised so we can see exactly what you're asking for money for. The total budget can be $30,000, but at least 50% of the budget should be asked for from CLP. We're also happy to support 100% of the project costs if the project is $15,000. There's a link here, and I think Janice is going to pop it into the comments, which has a nice infographic video for our eligibility criteria. So do have a look at that. And you can also follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram to learn more about CLP. But a couple of top tips, similar to what Nida and Nicholas and Simon have mentioned. The criteria, the eligibility criteria and reading the guidelines are paramount. We spend a lot of time putting these together, and we've tried to make them as detailed as possible so we can encourage people to read them and follow the guidelines. It's a really, really competitive process. So if you think of each area of the CLP application as having a score of 10 out of 10, you really want to be getting 10 out of 10 for each part of the application process. You don't want to have reviewers checking and giving any excuse or any opportunity to reject a proposal because the competition is so high. On the CLP website, we list CLP volunteer reviewers. Those are people who have been funded by CLP before, who can help you with putting together your application, who can do a quick review of what you're applying for and make sure it's in line with our eligibility criteria. Please do use that resource. It's a really fantastic thing to have. And in the application, as we're a capacity building program, we really want you to demonstrate that you're keen and committed, even at early stages in your career, and that your project is really, really worth funding. But the personnel involved in the project, the team members, are really, really paramount. And making sure it's not just a research project. Simon mentioned the feasibility, and that's also crucial. You're going to be applying for a project which is between 3 months and 12 months. So what do you expect to achieve within that time period? And we've got a SWOT analysis section, which must be fully completed. And here, we'd really like you to look at the strengths and the weaknesses of a team. As a capacity building program, we're expecting that your capacity will be built during the project duration. So think about the weaknesses and think about how those weaknesses are going to be overcome throughout the project. And we'd also encourage applicants to get in contact with the CLP partner organisation offices within their countries, if they have one, to see if the project is going to align with any work of the partner organisations. It's an online application form, so all applications must be submitted online. Thanks, everyone, and good luck with your applications. We look forward to receiving them by the deadline.
One second. Okay.
Hopefully you can see that all right. Janice, can you let me know? Yes, brilliant. Hi everybody, I am Olivia and I manage the Edge of Existence programme at the Zoological Society of London, based in the UK. So I'm just going to take you through a bit about Edge, what we do, and hopefully so the kind of opportunities there are for you going forward in terms of training and other kind of capacity building and conservation. So the Edge Challenge, what our programme is focused on is conserving evolutionary history. So as I'm sure a lot of you know, we're losing entire branches of the tree of life. And with this, all the millions of years of evolutionary history. And when we lose them, we lose these branches, we lose all these species and there is nothing left like them. So this is the focus of our programme. So EDGE actually stands for evolutionarily distinct and globally endangered. And so what we created back in 2007 is a metric to basically classify each species with an EDGE score, and it allows us to prioritize our work and hopefully for others and other policymakers as well to be able to conserve this evolutionary history. So the ED part of EDGE comes from the phylogeny, so this is the phylogenetic tree for each taxonomic group, so basically how old they are. And then we weight this by using the red list from IUCN. So all EDGE species, if to become an EDGE species, you unfortunately have to be within a threatened category. So they're all vulnerable and up. We currently have 8 taxonomic groups that we work on. And as you can see, all the way back from 2007, when we launched with mammals, up to today, where we've just in the process of launching our fish list. You'll see probably most of the groups that you guys currently work on, then you'll see those up there. But of course, there's a lot of groups still missing. And sadly, this is due to data gaps. But we're doing a lot of research to try and make sure that we can support more invertebrate and tree and plant groups. So the vision of our programme is to really secure the diversity of life and secure our evolutionary history. And we do this through kind of 3 main activities. Firstly is science and the research to create these lists and the prioritizations, awareness raising, because so many of these species, there's so little known about them. But the main focus and where we put a lot of our effort and that's most relevant today is our capacity building and our conservation action. And this is all done by supporting in-country nationals. So the EDGE Fellowship, this is hopefully something you've heard about. It's a 2-year programme and it's been running back since 2007. You can apply for it annually and it must be focused on a top priority EDGE species. So if you do get the fellowship, you secure a £10,000 grant. You attend 2, normally outside of COVID, 2 face-to-face training courses. One, the Conservation Tools course, which is 4 weeks and is something we're really proud of. It's basically designed to be everything you need to know and how to do for you to deliver a successful fellowship. So everything from project planning, financial management, working with communities and stakeholders through to data analysis and designing the appropriate methodology. And then the Conservation Leadership course, which is held at the end of the fellowship in London. And this is all about scaling up your work, particularly around fundraising. And then, of course, I think something that's so special about the fellowship is the support that you get over those 2 years. We have regional managers across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and they support you with these projects at every step of the way. The main outcome of the fellowship is the survival blueprint, which is basically a simplified action plan for your EDGE species. So many EDGE species do not have action plans, or if they do, they're very out of date. So we think this is a really important next step to actually conserve them in the long run. You, of course, join the Alumni platform, and there are also scale-up opportunities like EDGE Heroes, where there's a larger grant. They're very competitive to get, but hopefully something that we'll be doing more of. So we've had 121 EDGE Fellows across 46 countries. So you can see really across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Yeah, so I just wanted to take you through eligibility and kind of my sort of recommendations. The thing to remember with the Edge Fellowship is, I guess, the two important things is we have regional calls. So it is an annual call, but we will focus on Asia one year, Africa another year, and then Latin America the following year, and the subsequent like island nations as well. And you have to have your Edge species on that list to apply. So if your species is not listed on that curated list, it is not eligible. So the first step is definitely having a look at the list. We support low and middle income countries. We use the World Bank rankings. And this is really to make sure our investment is going to countries where conservation training is limited. You must be a national. Again, we want that investment and that training to stay within the country. This one's a tricky one. We say less than 10 years experience, and we've kind of say paid experience. But yeah, if you've got any questions about your eligibility around experience, then get in touch with us. We're open to all academic levels, PhDs down to not even having an undergraduate degree. We're really open to all types of academic levels. You must have an organisation that you're associated with, be it academic, a government department, or an NGO. And we really, really like to select projects that are focused on species that have little or no conservation attention. So even if there are species on the list that are technically eligible, you need to think quite wisely about how competitive you're going to be if it is perhaps an Asian elephant that has a lot of attention compared to an amphibian where no one has done any work on it. And yeah, conservation and research, they have to both be in there. Research really because we know so little about edge species, there has to be conservation outcomes, and you have to be working with stakeholders and communities. There must be a social component as well. So we have this annual call, like I've said, it opens in April for a couple of months. There are then internal and external reviews, and we do interviews for the shortlisted. We aim and kind of expect a 50-50 gender split. And I guess my advice to you would be to make sure you give enough time to actually put the proposal together. It's not a huge amount of work, but I definitely think, you know, getting people to give you feedback, and even the Edge team, if you send it in advance, we can give you feedback as well. So make sure you use that support. Reach out to fellows, just like Stuart was saying, reach out to other fellows or alumni. You can access everybody on our website, get their advice, get their guidance, because it looks really good. We love if you're reaching out and making that effort. And get in touch with us as well before. It's nice to know that you're going to be applying, and so we see your name come in the applications. Like everyone said, follow the guidelines and the FAQs. It's basically a cheat sheet. You know, I think you need to remember that we're giving you everything possible to put in a good application. Check your budget and make sure it adds up. And request, I think, references from people that you actually know. I think a lot of people go for kind of experts in the field, but really make sure that you've got people that can talk about you as an individual. Send an up-to-date photo. It's always nice that we can actually see your face. And if you do get interviewed, make sure you do your background reading on Edge and ZSL. And yeah, just like Stuart was also saying, show your passion and your personality, because this is about capacity building and investing in leaders. So we are not necessarily looking for the most experienced. We really want people that want to be, you know, a leader in conservation in their own countries and to work on edge species. So yeah, if you've got any questions, I'm definitely around. And of course, please have a look at the website and email info@ if you've got any particular questions or concerns. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks Olivia. I think I'm now live, so I'll kick start. I'm Danny from the Whitley Fund for Nature, and our mission as a grant giving and fundraising charity is to support locally led conservation projects by giving them funding, training and recognition across the global south. And so our focus is on supporting those locally incorporated NGOs over perhaps those larger, big international NGOs. And we fund nationals working in countries that are classified as not having a high income economy. We look for mid-career applicants, and by that we don't mean age, we mean people with a track record of success who really would benefit from that injection of funds, and that would sort of catalyse the progression and success of their project. We support practical work, practical conservation interventions that are founded in science and rooted in the involvement of local communities. And projects where the funding and the profile that comes with winning a Whitley Award would make a real difference. And we do this through the Whitley Awards, and these are project profile and funding prizes worth £40,000 in funding over 1 year. And this is an international competition. The applications open each summer and close in the autumn. And at that point, we then whittle down the many applications we receive to just 6 finalists who are invited to the UK for interview. And the winners receive a week of training and events culminating in the Whitley Award ceremony, where their prizes are presented to them by our patron, HRH, the Princess Royal. And so over the past 28 years, we've been delighted to provide £18 million worth in conservation funding to over 200 projects in 80 different countries. And beyond the Whitley Award, our alumni can come back to us for repeat funding through our continuation funding programme. So I really wanted to just provide a whistle-stop tour of our application process, and the others have touched on this already, but the first most paramount thing is to read the guidelines that we provide. We work so hard to put these together, and as Olivia just said, they're a cheat sheet as to how to complete the application. And word limit is also one of them. Our head of grants, Janice, mentioned this earlier this week. Where there are word limits, they're there for a reason. It's the amount of text we're expecting to see as a funder in response to our questions. And so if we ask for 500 words and you write 2 sentences, it's just not enough information for us as a funder to understand your project. But on the flip side of that, of course, if you write too much, time is limited, both yours and the funders. And so really do try to stick to those word limits. They are there for a reason. And I think Nicholas also touched on this earlier. Please don't assume that we have this broad wealth of knowledge. Most of us, as you can see from the presentations, are working across a huge spectrum of conservation. And so just bear in mind that the person reviewing your application may not be an expert in your field. And so avoid acronyms in the first instance, give it to us spelled out, and then you can use the acronyms going forward, but don't assume anything. And so what I'm actually going to do now is bring up the Whitley Award application form and just walk you through some of the areas where we have seen year on year that can be a little bit challenging for those who are looking to apply. So I'm just going to share my screen, if you just bear with me for one moment, and I shall bring up our application form that's in prep for 2022. So you're getting a sneak peek. So I'll roll down to the first area that is really key to the application form, and that's the objectives. And of course, like most funders, we're looking for those objectives to be SMART. And by SMART, we mean specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And if you have SMART objectives, that enables you as the PI running your project to be able to measure your progress against your original objectives going forward. And of course, then that allows you to see if you're actually achieving success. And if you're not, you can think about how you can adaptively manage and change tactics to achieve what you set out to do. So monitoring and evaluation is something that donors speak about all the time, but actually it's really important to remember as a principal investigator that you're not doing M&E for the donor. You should be doing it for yourself as the person leading that project, as an opportunity to sit back and reflect on how things are going and whether things need to be changed or adapted in order to reach your end goal. We had a question earlier on in the week, which was a really good one, I thought, and it was, what happens if your project is new or a pilot project and you don't yet have the ability to set SMART goals because you don't have a baseline? And in that instance, my advice would be to go and seek support from some of the funding organisations who are in this room who fund early career conservationists or new projects, to help yourself actually determine what that baseline is. And it will set you in really good stead going forward in terms of going on to apply to other funders, because you'll be able to evidence progress and impact. So, and that does take us on to evidence. At WFN, we're really proud to be conservation evidence champions and working in partnership with Conservation Evidence. And so we ask all of our applicants to tell us why they think their project will succeed. And this can be drawing from peer-reviewed literature, the grey literature, the unpublished stuff that is so important that's out there, but also your own past experience and the experience of others. And so Conservation Evidence is this incredible free online database that is sourced from thousands of different scientific journals. And you can enter any sort of case study into that website and search as to whether that intervention was successful or not. And I would recommend anybody starting a conservation project actually starts by looking at what evidence is available out there, what worked, what didn't, and it will save you a lot of time and reinventing the wheel. But I also think if we can think critically at the project design stage, we're far more likely to get a more successful outcome for species and conservation in the future. And that should make conservation more robust as a whole. The medical sector do it, the education sector do it. We as a sector need to be taking evidence into account. And so equally, actually, when we talk about evidence, of course, as funders, we want to hear about your achievements and what's gone well. But equally, we want to know about what hasn't gone well. And most of us have this conservation background. We know that things don't always go to plan. But the most important thing is that as a donor, you tell us what's going on so that we're aware. And that's a really crucial part of trust and relationship building. But we understand things don't go wrong. And the most important thing is to then share that and learn from it. So the next thing I'm going to share is our logical framework. And I wonder, Janice, if you could just let me know, can you see the log frame that's now up on the stage? And if not, I will stop sharing and I'll start again and bring the next one on. And just bear with me one moment and I will bring our log frame up. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that. And so the log frame is an integral part of many, many funding applications. And it's actually where I go to as the first port of call when looking at an application. And this sort of summarizes the project. And they do vary from organisation to organisation, but I just thought I would use this chance to sort of walk you through ours with a worked example. And so looking at the very top of the chart here, we've got your impact, and that's the bigger picture, what you want to achieve here. And then we move on to the project outcomes. These are the changes that you wish to make. And then your objectives, and I referenced these earlier, these are the SMART objectives that you're setting as to how you will achieve those aims. And then we look at the activities, and these activities list out what you will actually do to achieve your objectives. And then comes the monitoring and evaluation. So we have the activity indicators, and they measure your progress against your activities. But for me, as a reviewer, actually the most important part is the outcome indicators. And often these get left out. But the outcome indicators loop your whole project back to the bigger picture of what you're trying to do. And it takes it beyond the time frame of your specific proposal, which could perhaps just be for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years maximum. This is linking back your activities to your outcomes and the bigger picture. And it helps us as a funder to really determine what progress you're making towards achieving that wider goal. And then we have risks and assumptions, and they can be something like if you're wanting to look for a population of snow leopards, recognizing that they range over such a vast area. Actually, if you're camera trapping for them, a risk is that you may not find any. And an assumption might be that if you're recruiting candidates to a Mongolian PhD run program on snow leopards, is that you're assuming then that there is a candidate pool out there of people who are interested and qualified enough to apply to that program. So I'm going to stop sharing this one now and go back to the application form. Stop screen, perfect. Okay, I'll just go back to the main app now. Okay, so that's coming up. Okay, and then after that, we get onto your conservation outlook. And I know a couple of the other speakers have also referenced this as well. Get your personality and your passion across. Some of these proposals can be very scientific, and we read hundreds of them. It's a competitive world. You're often up against several hundred other candidates, and you want to make yourself stand out. Why do you do what you do? Why are you mad enough to be working in conservation? What drives you, and what's your vision? Where do you see this going in the future? And this conservation outlook question that we have here from WFN's perspective is your opportunity to really get that across. Now, one of the things I would also like to talk about is safeguarding, and this is something that you'll see cropping up more and more frequently among donors requesting you to have a safeguarding policy. And so by safeguarding, we don't mean the health and safety of your team, which is of course very important, but an entirely separate issue. By safeguarding, we're talking about making sure that no human rights are infringed on, and that people who are associated with your project don't come to any harm. And so you may have seen this sort of cropping up more and more in the news, and more requests from donors. And it's really important that whilst we do conservation, we do it well, and that it doesn't harm anyone in the process. And so it can feel really daunting if you don't have a safeguarding policy. But if you find that you do develop one, you'll find yourself eligible to apply to a multitude of other funders, because this is something that now is becoming as commonplace a request as a budget or a theory of change or a logical framework. So do really think about safeguarding, and don't just have it as a policy. Obviously, this needs to be a process that is monitored and that is adhered to. And then I think the last thing really to talk about is finances, and I'll stop sharing my screen because this comes up as a sort of separate Excel form on the Whitley Award application. But finances, it's where we as funders, and I think Olivia and Nida also touched on this, is we want to see where we can really make a difference. We're fundraising organisations ourselves, and so we want to see where our money can have the most impact. But beyond that, we also want to make sure that the project is sustainable. Who has funded it to date? Who is providing matched funding or complementary funding within our own grant? And then beyond that, making sure that there is future funding coming through that pipeline, so that we avoid that horrible situation of providing funding to a project and then it running out of funding and then having to step back, which actually does more harm than good. And so in the back of our mind is always the sort of longevity and the sustainability of this project, but also how you could use our funding as leverage to attract more funders. And so I can see Janice has appeared on the screen, which means I'm to time. And actually all that's left to say from me is that our application's open on the 1st of September. All of the content will be available online on our website, which is whitleyaward.org. And please check it out to apply, and email info@whitleyaward.org if you have any questions. So I think with that, let's bring all of the speakers back together and address any questions that we've had from the audience in this time. I can see everybody popping back on the screen. Fantastic. And just to say, it's so nice to see we've got such a multitude of people tuning in. I can see Vietnam, Brazil, Uganda, Sri Lanka, Ukraine. Like, what a great group of people tuning into this talk. Now, I know we've got a couple of questions. One's just come up from Imran. So this is a general question. If we apply to multiple funding agencies at a time for the same project and end up receiving more than one grant, would it invalidate the grants? What would be the way ahead? Does anybody want to jump in and answer that one? Stu, you're smiling, so I'll pick on you.
What a lovely problem to have. We've had that before, and I think even with some of the donors here, it's been something that's just come up. And I would say you obviously can't accept the funding from both donors for the same project. So you'd probably accept the one that first came in and then politely decline the rest. And you might even test the water and say, you obviously liked our project. Is there anything else we can try and apply for in the short term? For CLP, that wouldn't work. You'd have to reapply in the following year, unfortunately. But great problem to have.
Olivia, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say, I think we'd be quite open to finding kind of new objectives and the kind of other activities I suppose we could support. But yeah, I think it will massively depend on what the project is and how much funding has come in. But we're definitely quite flexible in terms of trying to adapt to match funding.
And Simon?
I would say, much like other people, you can't really, well, you certainly can't have give lots of money for the same project. But the first port of call is just simply get back to the donor, be honest with the donor, and discuss what options there might be. You may well have to refuse the grant, as Stuart has suggested, but don't just go ahead and then the donor finds out later. So it's important, like many of these things, to speak to the donor as soon as you have that information.
I would agree with Simon on that. I think being transparent with the donor is really key, and it may well be that you either have to reapply or that there's another need where those funds can be directed. Nida, I think you had a point.
I was going to say that from PTS's point of view, similar to what Olivia said, we would, you know, if we thought that the project leader was great and the species in the project was great, we'd be relatively flexible in saying, could you expand? Have you got a second study area or a second community that you want to work with potentially? And be open to a bit of dialogue rather than asking them necessarily to cancel it and reapply.
Nicholas?
We would also be the same as what Nida and Olivia mentioned, where we would try as much as we could to be flexible and open to the money being used for conservation of that particular species, and to try to see whether maybe there is a way of augmenting what is the two proposals and sort of bringing them together in a way that sort of is more than the sum of the parts. But that would be very much on a case-by-case basis as well, as Olivia mentioned.
Mm. Do we have another question out there? I can see a few, but I don't know, Janice or Lydia, if you want to bring one up. Okay, great. We've got one from Sebastian. I graduated in 2015, but I started working in conservation at the end of 2018. Am I able to apply for early career grants? Go, Simon.
The answer is yes. And we do expect, for varying reasons, people may pursue a different career. It may not be possible to have a career in conservation immediately after you've graduated. So people may go off and do completely different careers for a period of time. And when we talk about early career, sometimes we don't start in conservation until perhaps much later, maybe in the 30s, 40s, or even later than that. But from a rougher point of view, the answer is yes.
What about the Edge Fellows programme and CLP? I know they're specifically targeted at early career conservationists.
Yes, that would absolutely be fine. So we say, that's why I said it was a bit of a tricky one. We say 10 years, less than 10 years paid experience, but yeah, so we would, you know, if you've been on maternity leave, if you had career changes, none of that would count towards that. So I think we're really open. It's just making sure that our training will be beneficial, that you're still at a point where that training is going to be helpful to you. But yeah, absolutely. In this case, that would, I mean, for Edge would be absolutely fine. I would still consider that early career.
And Stuart?
Yeah, absolutely fine. Same as the others. Age isn't a qualifying criteria, as long as they're less than 5 years paid experience in conservation, and they can demonstrate that they've got a future and a desire to continue working in conservation.
Great. I know we had a question further back in the chat directed specifically to Nicholas, and it was, does the MBZ also fund habitat-based projects? And can you provide an address where to ask specific questions?
Thank you, Nadav. I have put in my email address into one of the chats. Maybe Lydia or Janice can make that available. It is also on our website in the Contact Us section. Generally, as regards the habitat-based projects, generally the MBZ fund will focus on species projects. Now, obviously, there is often a connection whereby a species is key to a particular habitat, or where conservation of a particular species requires intact habitat, or potentially even habitat restoration as part of a project. But we will, as a donor organization, prioritize particular species conservation work over general habitat work. I hope that works. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Nicholas. I think we've got time for just one more question. I can see one that's come in from Bowden about general strategy and whether this has changed for all of us as funders, given the emphasis on climate change and the urgency surrounding that. So perhaps I can speak on behalf of WFN here, and that all of us recognise that climate change and biodiversity conservation are interlinked, and we can't solve one without the other. And so nature-based solutions has started really popping up as this buzzword and a real potential solution that is already existing to solving the climate crisis that we're in. And so through WFN, we fund nature-based solutions programs such as, you know, keeping forests standing, protecting seagrasses, mangroves, and grasslands, all big carbon sinks. And so we support nature-based solutions through our continuation funding programme, but of course, making sure that there is still that really clear link to biodiversity conservation and working with communities. I wonder if any of the others could just say something closing on that as we approach COP26.
Shall I?
Nida.
Hi, yes, we haven't specifically changed any of our criteria or, you know, our focus for funding, but any project that focus specifically on looking at the threats of species faced because of a changing climate, or that address the issues through the wider community would certainly be welcomed and be given, you know, higher priority.
Okay, great. I think this might be a good place to end. I just wanted to say thank you very much to all of our speakers. This was a very informative session, and I'm sure you as the viewers as well have learned a lot here about each of their application processes. We will be posting their resources, so please check online on our WFN website as well as our individual websites. And if you are able to, we are hosting our next session with Wild Hub community. So this will be on in a few minutes, actually. So please join if you have some time. And again, I'd like to thank all of our speakers for such a wonderful session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.
Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.